Howdy. So we are going to go over how the cardiovascular, respiratory, and renal systems regulate blood pH. And as you guys, those of you know me, know that I always want to know why. Why is it important to understand pH and how the body regulates it? Because if you don't understand why you're learning it, you might not be all that interested in learning it. So let's start with why. Why is important? And again, in physiology, you have to really appreciate how things affect one another in human physiology. And it really, you need to start at the smallest level. And if you can understand the smallest components in the human body and how those small components build up to structures and how those structures interact to make organ systems work, it's easier to work backwards when something's not working. And so an example of this is looking at molecules and how those molecules are formed. And if they're formed correctly, they form the correct structure. And if the structure is correct, then it can do its job correctly. On the converse side, if the molecules aren't formed correctly, the structure is not correct. If the structure is not correct, then the tissue, cell, whatever can't do their job. So we always start off at looking at the chemical or molecular layer. And remember that the human body is mostly hydrogen, I would say 99.9% hydrogen, carbon, oxygen, and nitrogen. And these atoms are going to interact to form various different molecules. And these molecules are going to join together and form complex structures. And so this is showing you a contractile protein fiber that when is joined with other contractile protein fibers, so that's showing you this guy right here and that guy right there, and this would be another contractile protein, and now you have a functioning system that is going to make the heart muscle cell contract. And when heart muscle cells contract, this heart right here is a pump that pumps blood, and that's its job, and thus it's going to be the driving engine of the cardiovascular system. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, again, if these molecules are not structurally correct, they're not going to function correctly. That means the cell can't contract. That means the heart can't pump blood. And so pH actually can affect at the level of the molecules. And those molecules then can affect the shape. And so maintaining proper blood pH is critical for the body's function because shape and structure really are going to determine function and physiology. So even small changes in pH can have significant effects on the chemical molecular structures, which then can have an effect on the cells and then the tissues and the organs and ultimately the organ system. So this is why pH is really important. pH is measured on a logarithmic scale, pH scale, where 0 is complete acid. Really? So 0 is 100% acid, all the way up to 14, which is 100% base. And when we're talking about acid in the body, we're going to be talking about concentration of protons, and base is going to be bicarbonate. Neutral means it's exactly equal between acid and base. Now, logarithmic scales, just going from, say, 7 to 6, it's, yes, only one number lower, but that's 100% change in the concentration of the solution. And the solution in this case is blood, right? So pH is measuring the acid-base concentration of a solution. In physiology, that solution is our blood. And so even small changes can demonstrate huge differences in the acid level or the alkalinity level, which would be the base. So normal blood pH is between 7.35 to 7.45, this is slightly basic because it is on the north side there of the pH scale. But this difference between 0.35 to 0.45 is really looking at a 10% difference in, or 10 time difference in acidity. So even going from 0.35 down to 7.3, that is going to lower the pH concentration enough to actually disrupt structures in the body. So we're going to talk about that. So this logarithmic scale is useful because it allows easy comparison in expressing, very small changes in a solution, the solution's acidity or alkalinity or acid base. So the body is going to maintain this delicate balance, this acid base balance, which is pH. And again, acidosis is when the pH, so the blood pH is going to be less than 7.35. That's going to be acidosis. When blood pH levels get greater than 7.45, that's when you're alkalosis. Now, acidosis, you're going to have symptoms like fatigue, confusion, and respiratory stress. Where do we see this? Well, this is actually sadly it's not common, but it's not uncommon. If someone's diabetic and their blood sugar levels are not controlled. So if someone has really high blood sugar levels, blood glucose levels, that glucose is in the blood, which means it's not in the cells. And that's a problem because glucose has potential energy that the cell needs to then transfer that energy to ATP molecules. And ATP is the energy source of the cell. So if you can't get that energy into the cell, energy needs to come from somewhere and the cell's going to die. And so the liver will convert proteins, gluconeogenesis, this process of producing new types of glucose and also ketones. And ketones can be used for cellular energy when you don't have glucose in cellular respiration. And ketones are acidic. They're keto acids. And so the more glucose that's in the blood, the more ketones get produced, the more that's going to decrease the pH of the blood. And so you can get into ketoacidosis. Fatigue, confusion can drop into a diabetic coma. Respiratory distress, breathing becomes erratic, and it can be life-threatening. So pH of the blood is really important. Heart attacks, when people are having massive heart attacks, the acidity of the blood is going to go up, pH drops down. That has to do with heart muscle cells breaking open and the lactic acid that's building up due to anaerobic respiration in the cells because oxygen's not being distributed because the heart's not functioning. Again, blood pH can drop. So that's acidosis. Alkalosis is less common, but it too you have too much base, right? So that's where the pH is going to be. So blood pH is going to be greater than 7.45, and muscle spasms, irritability, abnormal heart arrhythmias. So the heart's not pumping blood as effectively. It can also be life-threatening. It's just it's not as common as acidosis. And so what's going on when the pH drops below 7.35 or goes above 7.45? Why is it important, right? Well, proteins, structures in your body, signaling molecules, transporter protein structures that go through the cell membrane for letting things into and out of the cell or cellular transport. These are all protein structures, and proteins keep their structure in a given pH range. And yep, you guessed it, that pH range again is going to be 7.35 to 7.45. When you get outside that range, the shape of the protein is going to change, and shape matters. Shape determines structure and function. So here, right here is an example of a protein. So this is a protein, and proteins get created in cells. And what codes for a specific protein is a gene. A gene in the DNA, which is housed in the nucleus of the cell, is basically a recipe for one protein. And this gene is going to say, hey, we want this amino acid to go next to this amino acid to go next to this amino acid. And so all these amino acids are being called out that they have to be in this specific order in this primary structure of a protein. And then each one of those amino acids are going to have a hydrogen bound to it and what's called an R group bound to it. And these two things determine how the protein folds in on itself. So there's a secondary structure, which is due to the hydrogens folding the protein, and then a third folding due to these R groups that are different on every different amino acid. And so that's going to ultimately shape the protein into a three-dimensional structure. And that three-dimensional structure is really important. So if it's a receptor or an enzyme, something that you want to bind a specific product to, or sorry, a specific substrate to, the shape matters and the configuration matters. Hormones, specific shapes, enzymes, antibodies, the 3D or three-dimensional structure of the protein is critical for their function. And if the pH drops below 7.35, what's going to happen is something called denaturing. And what denaturing is this acidic environment causes this three-dimensional shape of the protein to kind of fall back to the primary structural kind of component. So it unfolds or denatures. And when a protein denatures, it's going to lose its functional activity because it's no longer shaped appropriately and cannot perform its role. So enzymes are really important proteins. They're biological catalysts, meaning they make reactions happen quickly. They bring substrates together to form products quickly, so you can have a metabolic rate in your body, which means you can create enough ATP molecules. You're transferring enough energy from the food you ate to these ATP molecules, so your cells have a constant energy source of potential energy in those ATP molecules. And even a slight deviation from optimal pH, you drop down below 7.35, it's going to change the shape of some of these enzymes, which then impair its ability to make these reactions happen, right? So this is going to happen first. I love doing this in physiological processes. To understand these processes, what is the first thing to happen? Well, you box it out. Decrease in pH, right? And you box that out. What's that going to cause? It's going to cause this. It's going to decrease or denature the protein and impair its ability to help reactions occur. And so what is the overall effect? Is metabolic processes in the body can no longer function at a rate that you may need for the energy demands of the cells. So that's really important. In addition to, pH is going to affect cellular function. So like transporting sodium, potassium into and out of cell membranes, these are protein channels. And so if those also get denatured, they cannot let ions into and out of the cell. So transport across the cell membrane, super important for conducting nerve impulses for the nervous system to function, and muscle contraction and proper calcium, blood calcium metabolism, which is involved in contraction of muscles, the nervous system, blood clotting, and so on and so forth. So pH is really important for many, many, many physiological functions. And so understanding how the cardiovascular, respiratory, and renal system interact, how the three of them interact, is going to help you understand, how pH is regulated, which is important for all the things we just talked about. So let's go over the external environment. If this was a overly simplified human body, There's the external environment and then the internal environment inside human body. And inside the human body, there's a couple of things going on. So we're exchanging between the internal and external environment here at the respiratory system. So this is supposed to be the respiratory system. And that's for gas exchange or respiration. So you're bringing oxygen in from the air and we're getting rid of carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is actually produced by the cells during cellular respiration or this transfer of energy. So the cells are producing carbon dioxide and using oxygen, and then the cells are putting that carbon dioxide into the blood. Carbon dioxide is going to travel in the blood and then be blown out. So respiratory system taking in oxygen and getting rid of carbon dioxide with the bloodstream. Internal is going to be between the bloodstream and the cells. So that's internal. The other area, external, that we're going to talk about is the kidneys, right? The urinary system. So the urinary system is here. Kidneys filter blood. So your urinary system are two kidneys and the urinary bladder. And from the bladder, you're going to excrete urine. What urine is stuff you did not want in your blood. Did not want or need in blood. So each kidney has hundreds of thousands of nephrons that are filtering little portions of the blood. And in total, all of the nephrons in both kidneys are filtering your blood throughout the day, 24-hour cycle. And what filtration is it's taking out everything you don't want in the bloodstream and putting it into these nephrons. And as it goes through the nephrons, a couple of things can happen. You can reabsorb what's in the urine filtrate in these nephrons back into the bloodstream. Or you can keep it in the urine filtrate or secrete it back into the urine filtrate. And what's in the urine filtrate is ultimately going to be excreted or gotten rid of out of your body. And so that's between the external and internal environment. Again, internal is going to be between the blood and the cells. Now, plasma is the fluid portion of the blood, and that fluid that leaves the blood and goes out between the cells is called interstitial fluid. So interstitial fluid is the fluid in your body that is surrounding cells, and plasma is the fluid portion in your blood. Now, exchange between internal and external, again, you have respiratory, you have urinary, and you also have gastrointestinal. This would be your digestive tract. And we're not talking about this in this particular lesson right now, but you do have exchange there. That's for another day. How do each of these systems regulate blood pH? Well, they all work together, but we're going to break it down into the cardiovascular system first, and then we'll talk about how it works with the respiratory system and ultimately the urinary system. And so the cardiovascular system really maintains blood pH through its circulatory function, meaning you're circulating the blood throughout the body, and its buffering system. So we'll talk about the red blood cells, their role, they're circulating in the blood, and how it creates the buffering system. So the red blood cells, along with carbon dioxide, help create a buffering system. So red blood cells, they transport oxygen and carbon dioxide. So oxygen to the cells of the body. And then it takes the carbon dioxide that was produced in the cells during cellular respiration or transferring energy from the food you ate to ATP molecules, which is what your cells can use for energy. And in that process, it creates carbon dioxide. And so tissues are creating carbon dioxide, and that carbon dioxide is diffusing into the bloodstream. So this is blood right here. And that carbon dioxide is going to go in to the red blood cell, and it's going to combine with water to form carbonic acid. Now, carbonic acid can dissociate or split into a bicarbonate ion which is the base, and a proton, which is the acid. And that bicarbonate then can be sent out into the blood, into the plasma, the liquid portion of the blood. And it's going to travel in the blood as bicarbonate and or protons. So most of your carbon dioxide is transported as dissolved bicarbonate in the plasma. And when the blood returns to the respiratory system, this is the alveolar air in the respiratory system, that bicarbonate is going to again come in, bind with the proton, become carbonic acid, dissociate into carbon dioxide and water, and then the carbon dioxide is going to be sent out to the alveoli of the respiratory tract and then blown out. So that's the role of the red blood cell. It's creating a buffering system, because the fact that the red blood cells have an enzyme, which is a protein, which can denature if the pH gets too low. And this protein is very important because this protein enzyme or biological catalyst is what can make water and carbon dioxide form carbonic acid and or dissociate into bicarbonate ion and hydrogen ion. And that is what the buffering system is. So the buffering system is carbon dioxide combining with water to form carbonic acid. And then carbonic acid can dissociate into hydrogen ion, which is our blood's acid, and a bicarbonate ion, which is the alkaline or base component. And so when the pH needs to be decreased or become more acidic, carbonic acid is going to dissociate and release more hydrogen ions into the blood, thus lowering the pH, and it becomes more acidic. When the blood pH needs to be increased or become more alkaline or basic, bicarbonate ions are going to combine with the hydrogen ions, taking that acid out of the blood to form carbonic acid. And that's then can be further converted back to carbon dioxide and water. And that carbon dioxide can be exhaled out into the atmosphere, and you get rid of that carbonic acid. And so that's the buffering system that's available in the bloodstream. And really that is done with a combination of the respiratory system, right? Because the respiratory system is where we're bringing in carbon dioxide and, did I just say that? Where we're bringing in air and taking the oxygen out, and then we're getting rid of the carbon dioxide that the cells produced. And so the influence in carbon dioxide in the blood is this buffer system, right? So if the concentration of protons, so these brackets right here mean concentration of the acid in solution, and that solution is our blood plasma. If it goes up, then we are getting more alkaline or basic. And so excessive protons are combining with the bicarbonate ions, and then you're getting rid of, and then it's again going to become eventually CO2 water. You get rid of the CO2, you get rid of the acid, right? And it'll bring the pH up. On the flip side, if it's becoming too acidic, right, the concentration of plasma protons goes up, pH is going to go down. And so that means that you're releasing more protons and the pH goes down. So the buffering system is basically you can put more bicarbonate ions into the blood, or you can put more protons into the blood, making it acidic or basic. And this is really controlled by the respiratory system. So the respiratory system is controlling blood pH really through breathing, right? Controlling the levels of carbon dioxide. And as it was shown as carbon dioxide transport, in the blood is in the form of a bicarbonate, hydrogen ions, or carbonic acid. And so in the lungs, you can change the respiratory rate and increase the amount of carbon dioxide that you're eliminating in your respiration or breathing, or keep more carbon dioxide, right? And so if you keep more carbon dioxide, then you can ultimately have more carbonic acid. If you get rid of more carbon dioxide, you're going to get rid of more carbonic acid. So we're going to talk about that with respiratory. Now, in the brainstem has what are called chemoreceptors, and those are monitoring blood, plasma, pH levels, because pH, remember, it's the acidity of the solution, right? The plasma. And so chemical receptors or chemoreceptors are monitoring that. If blood pH decreases, that means it's getting more acidic, right? So indicating the acidity is increasing, the respiratory center is going to increase breathing rates. Why? Whoops. If you increase breathing rates, what's going to happen is you're going to eliminate more carbon dioxide. So if you eliminate carbon dioxide, you ultimately eliminate carbonic acid, which then eliminates acid base. And so eliminating more carbon dioxide reduces the acid, and because it's reducing the amount of carbonic acid forming. And so that can bring down your pH. Now, this is going to be a quick, easy, kind of fast solution, but it's not something that can really move the needle for long periods of time, and definitely is not going to be the homeostasis system that you need for constant control of pH in the blood. And we'll see that the urinary system comes into play when you're looking at long term. But for breathing, a good example of this is, say, anaerobic exercise. You're sprinting. When you're sprinting, what happens is you're using glucose or sugar as an energy source. You're transferring the energy out of glucose into ATP molecules. Well, you don't have any oxygen to basically oxidize the nucleotides, NAD, H, FAD. You learn this in cellular respiration. The end result, though, is you don't have oxygen. If you don't have oxygen, glycolysis, which is this energy exchange from glucose to ATP, is glycolysis. And the product is going to be ATP and pyruvate. If you don't have any oxygen, pyruvate gets converted to lactate, which is lactic acid. And so that is going to decrease the pH in your muscle cells. That's going to spill over into the blood. Lactic acid spills over or leaves the muscle cells into the blood, and that ultimately is going to slightly lower your blood pH. Well, the chemoreceptors are going to pick that up. And it's going to cause changes in ventilation or breathing, right? Because ventilation is breathing. And so you're going to kind of slow down your breathing, try to take deeper breaths to force more carbon dioxide out of the blood. And that's going to help increase your pH or kind of battle the acidity. You're using that buffering system in the blood by controlling your breathing, and breathing controls the amount of carbon dioxide that stays in your body or is forced out. So slow, shallow breathing is going to allow carbon dioxide to accumulate in the blood. So you're taking quick, shallow breaths, just blowing out. And CO2 is going to accumulate in the blood, and that's going to cause the blood to slightly lower in pH, or you're going to take deep breaths and blow out as much carbon dioxide as you can per breath. And that is going to get rid of the carbon dioxide. So you can't use this buffering system. So there will be no carbonic acid and there will be no bicarbonate and acid. So you can raise the pH. So this is really for quick changes to alter pH. For long term, we use the renal system or the kidneys, right? So the kidneys are the renal system. So renal system is basically two kidneys filtering blood. And then that filtrate becomes your urine, essentially, two ureters, urinary bladder, urethra, and out. And so the renal system, the kidneys are for long-term regulation of blood pH because they are filtering your blood. Now, this right here, we're going to pretend that this is the urinary system. You have filtration occurring, the nephrons are filtering blood. And it's filtering everything out of the blood into the little nephrons, and this becomes urine. Urine, sorry, can't see that, filter it. Now, everything gets filtered out in the beginning, right? So everything becomes urine filtrate, but a lot of it gets reabsorbed back into the blood. Your body can decide it wants to secrete some things back into the urine filtrate. At the end of the nephron, whatever is in the collecting tube of the nephron is then going to ultimately become urine, and you get rid of it or excrete it out of body. So this process of filtration, reabsorption, and then ultimately excretion or getting rid of it is how the kidneys are going to long-term regulate blood pH. So again, I kind of box this out for you. One, the kidneys filter blood and are going to excrete or get rid of excess hydrogen ions into the urine filtrate. That would raise pH, right? You're getting rid of acid. Excreting acid. Second thing it can do, it can reabsorb bicarbonate or base. So send base out of urine back into blood. And that's going to increase pH, right? By returning the base back to the bloodstream. And so the kidneys are going to adjust the acid-base concentration of the blood by either excreting protons, which is acid, or reabsorbing bicarbonate, which is base, or vice versa. It can reabsorb more protons and excrete more bicarbonate. So it's adjusting these ions to help maintain blood pH within a normal range. And so this is for long-term control. So basically, to summarize, when blood pH decreases, it becomes more acidic, the kidneys are going to excrete more protons or acid and reabsorb more bicarbonate ions, base, back into the blood. So you're peeing out more acid and you're keeping more base, and that's going to help return the pH back up long term. Or vice versa, if the blood's too alkaline or basic, the kidneys are going to then lower the amount of acid it's getting rid of, so reabsorbing it, and increase the amount of bicarbonate it's getting rid of or excreting. And therefore, it's going to keep more acid, get rid of more base in the urine filtrate, and decrease the pH of the blood. So this is a long-term process, as it doesn't happen as quickly as, say, the respiratory system can act. So when you're kind of wrapping this all up, conclusion, it's important to understand these three systems are working together. The respiratory system, I would say, is kind of number one. It's controlling how much carbon dioxide is making it into the blood. And that carbon dioxide is the short-term regulation because it's going to be converted in the red blood cells to the buffer system of the blood, plasma, into bicarbonate ions and protons, so the acid and base. The urinary system is then regulating this acid-base concentration from the blood, right? So the urinary system is going to excrete or reabsorb acid and base, right? So acid and base. And that's going to be the long term. And so these three systems are monitoring and controlling blood pH in the short term and in the long term, really to maintain enzyme structure, hormone structure, neurotransmitter structure, proteins. These are all protein structures, enable cells to transport things in and out of the cells through channel proteins and ion channels, and also calcium metabolism, right? For all the list of reasons, calcium is super important. And this is going to ensure optimal conditions. So all these biochemical reactions can occur, your metabolism continues to transfer potential energy in the food to cellular energy and maintain overall health. So hopefully this helps illuminate the importance of pH in the blood and how the body physiologically controls it.